Hello everyone, welcome back to term 3. And so I'm back with, I guess, the worksheets for this week. So we'll be looking at the Specialist Math Unit 1 and 2 worksheet for week 1, term 3. And let's start. So it's basically section 2, I guess, reciprocal graphs. And yeah, so for the first, so I guess for these two graphs, I'll show you everyone two different methods to do it. And I think question 1, I used the more complicated method, and question 2, I used the simpler method. So for question 1, what I did is that, first of all, I work out the asymptotes, and we know the asymptote is, well, first of all, we know that asymptote occurs at x squared minus 0, right? Because we can't let the bottom of a fraction be 0. And with that, so we get x is equal to plus minus 3, and that's what we can draw these vertical asymptotes in. And we also know that the other asymptote is that y is equal to 1. And the reason because of that is that this part here can never be 0. And that's why y can never be 1. So that's why that's another asymptote we know. So we can also draw that one in. And after that, we work out the y-intercept and x-intercept. So that should be pretty self-explanatory. We make x equal to 0, and we make y equals to 0. And we get these points, so we can plot these points in. Then we have to work out the turning points for this graph. To do that, we take the derivative. And after that, we just get that the derivative of this function is 4x divided by x squared minus 9 squared. And we know that the graph is a turning point when the derivative equals to 0. And the only case here where the derivative equal to 0 is that when x equals to 0. So we know that, interestingly, the y-intercept here is actually also a turning point. And with that said, we know the general shape for a inverse function. We can just fill in all these points, and we have the first graph finished. So for the second graph here, what I did here is that I drew the non-inverse function. So, actually, now I look at this, I actually done this one incorrectly because I forgot the absolute value part. So let me just quickly get the correct sketch of this. The correct sketch of this, we should move this lower part up here because it's a absolute value graph. So let me quickly erase this lower part here. Okay. Actually, no, I think I'll keep it in just for the sake of my explanation, I guess. Let me just redraw it. So we know that this is a inverse quadratic graph. So to do that, we can draw in the quadratic function first, and hopefully that's pretty easy. We work out so we factorize the bottom part to x minus 3, x plus 1. So we know the x-intercepts is -1 and 3. And we also can complete the square, put this into the turning point form like that, and we'll get the turning point is 1 and -4. So after we complete this quadratic graph, we know that every single x-intercept for a quadratic graph turns into a asymptote for the inverse, not the inverse function, for the reciprocal function. So we know that the reciprocal function would have asymptote at x equals to -1 and 3. And that's why we can see that the red asymptote goes down at -1 and 3. And then we know that for an inverse function, right, it kind of goes the opposite way as I'm keep on saying inverse function for some reason, but the reciprocal function goes the opposite way as the normal function. So we know that if something is approaching infinity, which we see this at this part of the blue line here, we know that approaches 0 for our reciprocal function. And for something that approaches 0, which is around this part here, it approaches infinity. So we know that so that's basically the two sides of our function done. And for the bottom part, we know that we just inverse this part of quadratic, right? So the turning point is 1 and -4, and then that means that the turning point for the reciprocal function is 1, and the inverse of -4, the reciprocal of the -4, which is -1 on 4, and we know that the y-intercept is 0 and -3, so the reciprocal is just 0 and -1 on 3, which is shown by this red curve here. And now to the final part, which is the one I forgot, is that there's an absolute value sign around this. So we should flip the part that's below the x-axis on the top, so which is seen by this purple line here. And this coordinate here should be 0 and +1 on 3, because that's the y-intercept flipped around. And this turning point here should be 1 and, 1 on 4, because that's just -1 on 4, flipped above the x-axis. Yep, so that's these two graphs drawn. So I guess final answer for this graph, let me just switch to another color, is this edge here, and this edge here. And if anyone has any questions regarding this, please let me know and I can explain a bit further. But other than that, I'll see you all next week.